Hello again, everyone. My name is Louis Ruggiero. Welcome to the King Messiah Project. This is part 6 of a 10-part series titled Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah. Now, in the previous session, I showed that Scripture eliminates Israel as a suffering servant of Isaiah 53. In this session, I'd like to share with all of you how Yeshua the Messiah fits perfectly into the chapter. So without further ado, let's begin. Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Now, in session number 4, I already shared with you 6 solid connections between the arm of the Lord and the Messiah. He would be king, judge, shepherd, and priest. He would be righteous and bring salvation. There's no need to repeat all of this again. So, for the sake of time, let's move on. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 10 refers to the Messiah as the root, Sheresh, of Jesse. And Isaiah chapter 44, verse 3 refers to Israel as the dry ground. So, if the Messiah is a root and Israel is the dry ground, we turn to Isaiah chapter 53, verse 2, which reads, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant and as a root," same Hebrew word here, Sheresh, out of a dry ground. Now, the Messiah grew up as a root out of the dry ground Israel. Based on the fact that the Messiah is called a root, and Israel is described as the dry ground, this is how we should interpret verse 2. For he, the Messiah, shall grow up before him, Israel, as a tender plant, and as a root, the Messiah, out of the dry ground, Israel. He, the Messiah, hath no form nor comeliness, and when we, Israel, shall see him, the Messiah, there is no beauty that we, Israel, should desire him, the Messiah. Here's the next verse, Isaiah 53, verse 3, which reads, "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not." Now, remembering this, let's go back to Isaiah chapter 49, verse 7. This is what it says. "Thus saith the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to him whom man despiseth, to him whom the nation abhorreth." Now, Israel is the nation here that despises its Holy One, its Redeemer. Goy is the Hebrew word that translates nation. It never translates nations. Remembering this, John chapter 1, verse 11 says, "He, the Messiah, came unto his own," that's Israel, "and his own received him not." Now, based on the evidence, this is how we should interpret Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3. He, the Messiah, is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we, Israel, hid as it were our faces from him, the Messiah. He, the Messiah, was despised, and we, Israel, esteemed him, the Messiah, not. Now let's move on to the next verse. Isaiah 53, verse 4 says, "Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted." Now, Isaiah 53 isn't the only place that prophesies that the Messiah would be beaten. For example, in Isaiah chapter 50, verses 6 through 7, this is what it says. "I gave my back to the smiters, and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. Therefore have I set my face like a flint, and I know that I shall not be ashamed." Isaiah 52, verse 14 says, "His visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men." Zechariah 13, verse 7 says, "Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered." And in Matthew chapter 26, verse 31, Yeshua cited Zechariah 13, verse 7 on behalf of himself when he says, "For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered." And in Micah chapter 5, verses 1 through 2, this is what it says about the one who would be born in Bethlehem. "They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek." Now, based on the biblical evidence, this is how we should interpret Isaiah 53, verse 4. "Surely he, the Messiah, hath borne our Israel's griefs, and carried our Israel's sorrows. Yet we, Israel, did esteem him, the Messiah, stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted." Now let's move on to verse 5. This is what it says. "But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." Now, based on what we've seen so far, this is how this verse should be understood. "But he, the Messiah, was wounded for our Israel's transgressions. He, the Messiah, was bruised for our Israel's iniquities. The chastisement of our Israel's peace was upon him, the Messiah, and with his, the Messiah's stripes, We, Israel, are healed. And here's the next verse, verse 6. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. Now, based on what we've seen so far, this verse should be interpreted in the following manner. All we, Israel, like sheep have gone astray. We, Israel, have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him, the Messiah, the iniquity of us, Israel, all. And moving on to verse 7, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. Now this verse tells us that the servant would not complain when tormented and afflicted. Yeshua, our Messiah, never complained when he was flogged with the whip, when they drove nails into his hands and feet, when they placed a crown of thorns on his head, when they gave him vinegar to drink, and when they spat at him and mocked him. Instead, this is what he said. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because of the biblical evidence, this is how Isaiah 53 verse 7 should be interpreted. He, the Messiah, was oppressed, and he, the Messiah, was afflicted. Yet he, the Messiah, opened not his, the Messiah's mouth. He, the Messiah, is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb. So he, the Messiah, openeth not his, the Messiah's mouth. So far, the Messiah is a perfect fit for Isaiah chapter 53. Next is verse 8. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. Now there's one thing about this verse that needs to be addressed. Many defenders of rabbinic Judaism make a big deal about the Hebrew word lamo that they claim always translates to them. Isaiah 53 verse 8 in the New American Standard Bible translates this verse as, to whom, lamo, to them, the stroke was due. The 1917 Jewish Publication Society Bible, a Jewish translation, translates this verse the same way as, to whom lamo, to them the stroke was due. Additionally, the Sonsino translation of this verse, a highly respected Jewish translation, similarly renders this verse as follows. For he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. The same understanding. As a result, based on the translations of both Christian and Jewish Bibles, this is how Isaiah 53 verse 8 should be interpreted. He, the Messiah, was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he, the Messiah, was cut off out of the land of the living. He would be killed. For the transgression of my people Israel was he, the Messiah, stricken. Let's move on to verse 9. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Now there are a few things that need to be addressed about this verse. The first is this, the servant's violence. Some within the rabbinic community claim that Yeshua showed violence when he overthrew the tables of the money changers in the temple. Here's the passage showing what Yeshua said when he was doing this. He said, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Remember, the Hebrew word for violence in Isaiah 53 verse 9 is Hamas. It refers to an unrighteous violence. Yeshua was displaying a righteous violence, not an unrighteous violence, when he overthrew the tables of the money changers here. When he did that, he cited Isaiah chapter 56 verse 7 about the temple, which states, mine house shall be called an house of prayer for all people. The next thing about this verse that needs to be addressed is the fact that the Hebrew word translated death here is bimatov, which is actually the plural word for death. Because of this, the rabbinic community insists that, since this word is plural, it cannot refer to the death of a single individual. However, that's not necessarily the case. Let's take a look at Ezekiel chapter 28 and see what God said to the prince of Tyrus. Picking up in verse 8, this is what it says. Thou shalt die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the seas. And in verse 10 he said, thou shalt die the deaths of the uncircumcised. Now the understanding here is that the death of the prince of Tyrus, a single individual, would be so severe that it would be as if he would suffer many deaths. And with respect to Isaiah 53 verse 9, the understanding is that the Messiah's death would be so severe, it would be as if he suffered many deaths. His death is counted for the deaths of many sinners. Let's move on. Now, the last thing about this verse that we need to realize before we can come to a better understanding of what it means is to make note that the Hebrew word asher better translates rich man. In fact, in the New American Standard Bible, Isaiah 53 verse 9 reads, "His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man, asher in his death." And it is thought by many that the rich man prophesied in this verse was actually Joseph of Arimathea, who provided the sepulchre where Yeshua was buried. Matthew 27 verse 57 states, "When the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus, Yeshua's disciple." Now, Yeshua was buried in a tomb in Israel. Isaiah 1:4 describes the nation as a sinful nation. So, based on the biblical evidence, this is how we should interpret Isaiah 53 verse 9. "And he, the Messiah, made his, the Messiah's grave with the wicked, Israel, the sinful nation, and with the rich man, Joseph of Arimathea, in his, the Messiah's death, because he, the Messiah, had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his, the Messiah's mouth." Now let's move on to verse 10. "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand." Now, based on what the Bible has revealed to us up to this point, this is how this verse should be interpreted. "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him," the Messiah. "He, the Lord, hath put him," the Messiah, "to grief. When thou shalt make his," the Messiah's soul, "an offering for sin, he, the Lord, shall see his seed, he, the Lord, shall prolong his," the Messiah's days, "and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand." Now, one other important thing that needs to be mentioned about verse 10 is the use of the Hebrew word zerah, translated seed, as in, "he shall see his seed." Many defenders of rabbinic Judaism claim that this word always refers to a physical seed, but that's not true. And an example of that can be found in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, where God told the serpent that he would put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed, zerah, and her seed, zerah. Now, women don't have seed. Men have seed. Also, regarding the seed of the serpent, I doubt very highly that the Lord was referring to little baby snakes. Now, we're almost finished. Let's move on to verse 11. "He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities." Now, I shared with everyone in the previous session that Isaiah chapter 5 verse 13 tells us that Israel was sent into captivity into Babylon because they have no knowledge. But the Messiah has knowledge, and here's the proof. Isaiah chapter 11 verse 2 regarding the Messiah. This is what it says. "And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord." And in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, this is what it says about Yeshua. "In whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." Based on the biblical evidence, this is how we should interpret verse 11. "He, the Lord, shall see of the travail of his, the Messiah's soul, and shall be satisfied. By his, the Messiah's knowledge, shall my righteous servant, the Messiah, justify many, for he, the Messiah, shall bear their, Israel's, iniquities." Let's close with the last verse in this chapter, verse 12. "Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." Now, based on Isaiah chapter 53, verses 1 through 11, this is how we should interpret the final verse. "Therefore will I, the Lord, divide him, the Messiah, a portion with the great, and he, the Messiah, shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he, the Messiah, had poured out his, the Messiah's soul unto death, and he, the Messiah, was numbered with the transgressors, and he, the Messiah, bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." So as we can see, Yeshua the Messiah fits perfectly into Isaiah 53. Coming up next, Isaiah 9, "For unto us a child is born." Who is that child? Is it King Hezekiah, as Rabbinic Judaism teaches, or is it the Messiah? Until then, this is Louis Ruggiero saying, God bless you all, and we'll see you soon.